Welcome back to Out of the Fog. Well, James McLeod and Ashley Fitzpatrick are two journalists with the Telegram who've been immersed in covering various political and current affairs topics, like the latest with Muskrat Falls, and prepping towards covering this weekend's Liberal AGM in Gander. And I'm pleased to have them both here in studio now, as politics here in our province never ceases to provide them with a loss for words, and I guess that depends maybe sometimes on the subject at hand. But I don't think that's going to be, of course, the case here tonight. Let's start with Muskrat Falls. Of course, there was this huge meeting. Some have been calling it a marathon meeting that took place between government and the Indigenous leaders. This over concerns raised over methyl mercury levels. And when it comes to flooding the reservoir. I'm just curious, some people are very skeptical as to the outcome of these results. Some people are actually satisfied with this. I'm just wondering what your takeaway was from this.
Yeah, I should mention that James got the joy of waiting for these leaders to come out of this meeting. I just tuned in to the live stream, so thankfully I didn't have to be standing around as long, but I think I wasn't the only person who was tuned in, because it was such a significant event and a significant moment, I think, in the development of this project, but also generally speaking Aboriginal affairs in the province. And I don't think it can be understated as to just how significant that moment was, because for some of these leaders, I mean, someone like Todd Russell, you look back a few years and his face was on the pavement after, he was in the process of being arrested by the RCMP for a protest out by Muskrat Falls. And I think the underlying factor here was that there were concerns that remained unaddressed for an extended period of time. It's become a point where not everyone is on the same page. So what we have now is we have people have different opinions about how things should move forward. So I think the really key point coming out of this is going to be whether or not the leadership for the folks up there, for the Indigenous people in Newfoundland and Labrador, are going to be connected with all of the population as well, because I think there's a very good chance that even should the leadership decide that they're okay with the plans as they're laid out, that they feel they're being appropriately consulted and accommodated, which is a key piece there as well, that it may not be that everyone comes with them on that. So I think that'll be interesting to watch in the coming days in particular.
Right. James, what did you take away from this? And as Ashley alluded to, you were there to the early hours of the morning.
Well, and I agree completely with Ashley that this was a historic moment, and one that I think Dwight Ball deserves a lot of credit for, bringing Aboriginal leaders from the three communities in Labrador together and righting something of a wrong in the fact that for the last 5 years or so, these legitimate concerns have been pushed aside and minimized, and there hasn't been a lot of engagement and social license with these communities. And that's a move that is going to cost money, but if we're serious about reconciliation with Indigenous communities in Canada, this is something that has to happen. And to his credit, this is something that Dwight Ball, the reason it took so long is that Ball and senior people went into a room with the leaders of these communities, and they checked their cell phones at the door. And they all just sat in this room and talked and talked and talked until they came to a conclusion. And that fact, the fact that they came to some sort of agreement, which if you actually look at the nitty-gritty of it, is really a process for reconciliation over a period of time, it's a good thing. The other side is that this is hopefully settling away one part of the massive mess that is Muskrat Falls. So even if you got the methyl mercury thing sorted out, you've still got a ton of other things.
Yeah, and in terms of sorting that out, I mean, it is a very tentative place. I mean, right now, we're coming into what's going to be a decision from these Indigenous leaders to say, okay, we've consulted with our constituency, our people, and we've had our own experts look at your reports on a winter flooding for this reservoir, at least a partial flooding, and we agree that that can move ahead. Now, if they come out with an opinion that says that shouldn't happen, then there's nobody who's standing up and saying what is going to happen next with this project.
So that still remains,
and it's a big question
remain.
mark.
Yeah.
And that's your social license piece, you know, the very beginnings of it. You know, after that comes this environmental committee, and then you need to look at science and the question of soil removal. So there's a lot of big question marks still remaining.
I want to bring Stan Marshall into this. Of course, the CEO of Nalcor, you know, he came out this week and made some comments, and essentially was, you know, saying that we're going to do what's right. But I feel as though there's a little bit of mixed messaging. I know we were talking about this before we started rolling. You know, he comes out and says, you know, we have to start flooding. It has to happen this weekend. Whereas, you know, in the meeting, they talked about reviewing, and of course, until they come to an agreement, the flooding actually wouldn't start. So, you know, what do you take away from I guess, what you talked about?
I was saying to you earlier, I think essentially there's a piece here where they were two very different processes. A big part of that meeting was the Aboriginal affairs side. It's intergovernmental affairs. You know, it's that communication between leaders. To the corporate side, this question of the dollars day to day, how much is being spent, how much are we losing, how much maybe are we picking up in terms of savings on one piece or another, that's very much Stan Marshall's wheelhouse. And it is his job to be saying that, you know, if we wait another week, we'll lose, you know, an estimate of this much money. If we wait another year, it will be, you know, this kind of consequence. So I think that's just a reflection of maybe those different roles. But again, it'll be very much the Indigenous leaders and the people who I think are deciding how this moves forward.
Okay.
Well, this potentially could come to a head in a fairly dramatic way. I mean, hopefully everything goes smoothly and the Indigenous communities say that they're all right with flooding and the deal as it's written proceeds. But if there's any hiccup to that, the crunch time is this weekend, which is right in the middle of Dwight Ball having a leadership vote on Saturday afternoon, and you know, being in a hotel with a bunch of reporters and a bunch of Liberal delegates at their annual convention. Mm-hmm. So he could be dancing pretty fast.
All right, and well, because you brought that up, I want to talk about that, because of course you're going to be out in Gander. The Liberals, of course, as you said, their big AGM. In one of your story yesterday, you said, you know, this has been a fairly good week for Liberals, and I guess, you know, when you think of I guess the past 11 months, what are your thoughts in terms of government moving into this weekend?
Well, it has been a few things have gone Dwight Ball's way. Recently, not least of which is the news, just again on the eve of this convention, that they got a $2.9 billion extension to the loan guarantee for Muskrat Falls, which that's just money that's going to help the project. No matter how you look at it, that's a good thing. And when you stack on top of that a few other developments, poll numbers that aren't as bad for Ball, and what I'm hearing is that the work has been done, that this leadership review, where months ago I was hearing rumblings within the parties that this may be a bit of a contentious point, at this point I'm hearing that fight isn't really going to happen. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be mostly a formality. So yeah, I think that this weekend is going to be a chance for Ball to let that hair of his down and come together with his hardcore base, but you know, maybe also hit the reset a little bit, because the next thing ahead is the House of Assembly, and after a good week, what comes next for politics in this province could be very not good. Mm-hmm. I mean, there is still an Ed Martin severance scandal Auditor General's report to come out. There's the House of Assembly and daily question periods, which was not a great look for Dwight Ball last spring, and you know, on and on and on.
Yeah, in the last few days, I think he's definitely picked up points in terms of the federal-provincial relations. I think a lot of people who are following that piece closely saying, well, they talked a lot about this sort of relationship between Liberals and Liberals, but we're not getting much out of it, are starting to now maybe see a little bit of that return in the last few days. So you've got the Muskrat Falls loan guarantee, you've also got things like the discussion around infrastructure funding, and the city of St. John's, for instance, coming out and congratulating the federal government or thanking the federal government for stepping up even further in terms of funding some of those key infrastructure requirements. So I think he has picked up points there provincially, and in terms of looking forward, it might be a bit of a different matter.
We do have just a short bit of time left, but I do want to touch on the changes in terms of security at Confederation Building. Some drastic changes over certainly the last week or so. James, what have you taken away from this? Is it extreme in terms of the measures that they're taking? Because now the public can't walk through the front doors.
On one level, this is all politics and symbolism, and it from a sort of nuts and bolts point of view, it kind of makes perfect sense. As it stands now, people could wander around Confederation Building unescorted, depending on what they were going in for, and it was not a very secure building at all. I'm told by sources that there have been a rise in legitimate concerning death threats against government MHAs, and that's part of what's driving this. Plus the attacks on the attack on Parliament 2 years ago. But for a government that is seen to be under siege, literally barring the public from entering the front door, having them enter in the basement at the back, and there's also been a bit of a fight among media where our access is being restricted. Mm-hmm. It's something they're going to need to manage carefully.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. We are all out of time for this evening. I want to thank you both very much for coming in and sharing your views tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Great to be here.
We're going to take a very short break, but we'd love to hear your thoughts. Of course, you can call 757-9600 or email us at outofthefog@rci.rogers.com. We'll be right back.